know it sounds absurd now, looking back. But when you're drowning, any outstretched hand feels like a miracle. My mother was diagnosed with advanced stage pancreatic cancer, and the doctors were blunt. She had only a few months, maybe weeks. Chemotherapy would only bring suffering, and there was no guarantee it would work. I refused to accept that. I had to believe there was another option. It was during one of those sleepless nights that I came across his name. It appeared as an ad on a terminal illness forum, Dr. Halden's clinic, Revolutionary Natural Therapies Against Cancer. There were testimonials, before and after photos. People claiming they had been given up on and were now living normal lives. It all seemed miraculous, unreal, but convincing. I called. A woman answered. She spoke with a calmness that was almost anesthetizing. "We don't treat the disease, we treat the body. Here, we restore health." We scheduled an appointment for 2 days later. The hospital was in a small village in rural Nevada, a forgotten place on the map, surrounded by dust and silence. When we arrived, my mother was weak but still walking. The building looked like it had once been an old hotel, renovated. On the front, a golden sign reflected the sun with the words, "Halden Center for Biological Healing." That's when we met the man. Tall, gray-haired, wearing a light beige suit and eyes so vividly blue they seemed to see right through you. "You're in the right place," he said, smiling at my mother. "Traditional medicine gave up on you. I won't." In that moment, I wanted to believe. God knows I did. The inside of the clinic was too clean, too cold. Every hallway looked freshly painted, but soulless. The smell wasn't like a hospital, but it wasn't welcoming either. It was a mix of citrus disinfectant and something metallic, like old blood. There was no sound except for the echo of our own footsteps. We were greeted by a receptionist who asked us to hand over all documents and cell phones. "To ensure focus on the treatment," she said. I hesitated, but my mother, always confident, gave me a calm look. I handed everything over. They took us to a room on the second floor. It had a bed, white sheets, and a strange machine beside it. There was also a small glass vial with a reddish liquid on the nightstand. A note next to it read, "Initial dose. Administer today." Shortly after, we were gathered in a makeshift auditorium with other families. There must have been around 30 people there. Dr. Halden stepped onto the stage like a preacher at a Sunday service. He spoke about vital energy, about how cancer was a symptom of the disconnection between body and spirit. He used beautiful words, but none of them answered anything. Some cried. Others applauded. There was faith there, blind, dangerous faith. That night, my mother took the dose from the vial. She said she felt warmth inside and a slight dizziness. I wanted to believe it was a sign that something was working. I wanted it so badly. But something about that place wasn't right. The next morning, my mother woke up nauseated. Her eyes were sunken, her skin paler. When I mentioned it to one of the nurses, none of them wore name tags or medical uniforms. She replied with a rehearsed smile. "It's the body reacting. It means it's working." But the following days began to reveal strange patterns. Patients who had been with us in the auditorium disappeared overnight. I asked about them, and the staff gave vague answers. They were discharged early. They were transferred to another unit. I never saw anyone actually leave. Meals came on identical trays, thick soups, greenish juices, and unmarked pills. I tried to ask what was in them. Natural and energetic supplements, they said. But no one gave us any sheets, no labels, and everything was mandatory. There were nurses who stood watch, ensuring everyone took their medicine. One night, I heard muffled screams coming from the hallway. Screams of pain or desperation. I ran to the door, but it was locked from the outside. When I asked about it the next day, they told me a patient had an emotional episode. But the staff member's eyes didn't match the calmness of her words. My mother was visibly deteriorating. Tremors, occasional bleeding. I asked for a doctor for tests. All I received was another dose of colored liquids and sweet words, like poison wrapped in honey. I started writing everything down in a notebook hidden in the lining of my suitcase. I needed to understand, or at least survive to tell the story. That morning, I was in the hallway taking my mother's breakfast tray back when I noticed a woman staring at me from the end of the corridor. Brown hair tied in a messy bun, an old lab coat, tired eyes. She motioned for me to come. I walked over to her like someone crossing a minefield. "You need to get your mother out of here," she whispered. I froze. My whole body stiffened. That man, he's not a doctor. He never was. I was a registered nurse here during the first few months. I thought it was a legitimate alternative clinic. I found out too late. She looked over her shoulder, tense. They got rid of documents, replaced medications with placebos, unstable chemical solutions, things I don't even recognize. I've tried to warn others before. One patient died right in front of me after receiving an injection. The body disappeared before sunrise. My stomach turned. I reported it. The police came, but he had a commercial license, not a medical one. Nothing stopped him from continuing. They changed the clinic's name, hired new staff. I stayed behind to try and help the next ones, but I can't do this forever. I ran back to the room. My mother was feverish, struggling to breathe. Her lips were cracked, and she was trembling despite being under 3 blankets. I tried calling the local emergency service. Deadline. I tried leaving through reception, and 2 security guards stopped me. Patients and family members only leave with medical authorization, they said. From that moment on, I knew we were prisoners, not in a hospital. In a theater of death, with an audience made of victims. My mother died 2 days after that conversation. Not in peace, not with dignity, but suffocated by a pain that seemed to eat her from the inside out. That so-called doctor didn't even show up to see her in her final moments. The only constant presence was the injections, the colored liquids, and the empty words. That morning, when they told me she had passed peacefully, I noticed something even more terrifying. There was no medical record. Nothing had been documented. No certificate, no cause of death. Just a mechanical phrase. Her case did not respond to treatment. They wanted me to sign a form releasing the body for immediate cremation in accordance with the clinic's policy. I refused, and when I tried to leave with her body, 4 men came, strong, silent. They took her back as if she were lost luggage. Only then did I manage to escape. I faked a faint in the lobby, and in the confusion, I ran. I walked for miles until I found a cell signal. I called the state police, a newspaper. I screamed for help with what little voice I had left. Days later, the clinic was shut down. But Dr. Halden had already vanished. He left behind an empty building, burned documents, and dozens of devastated families. There was no justice, only silence. My mother believed in him. And so did I, and that's what eats away at me to this day. We want a way out so badly that sometimes we choose the worst door. Today, many years later, I still sometimes wake up to the sound of that man's voice echoing in my head. I won't give up on you. He gave up. On all of us. My mother was a strong woman, full of faith. She didn't deserve to be deceived, and I can't forget the moment I saw the hope fade from her eyes. That place took everything from me, but it left me with something I carry to this day, the obligation to warn others. If you're hearing this, and someone promises you easy miracles, run. Ask questions. Do your research. Don't place the life of someone you love in the hands of a stranger with a pretty speech. Because the worst pain in the world isn't loss. It's knowing it could have been prevented. My first night shift was quieter than I expected. The hospital already had that cold, impersonal air that old buildings tend to carry, but during the night, it transformed into a completely different place. The sound of monitors, footsteps echoing down empty hallways, the constant smell of antiseptic. Everything felt amplified in the absence of voices. I'd been hired as extra support for the night shift. The team was small, and many departments were either closed or barely active. On that first night, they handed me a sheet with basic instructions. Nothing major, regular rounds, checking occupied rooms, being mindful of patients sensitive to light and noise. There was, however, one note in bold at the bottom of the page. A quiet warning, almost insignificant, but it stuck in my mind. Ward 8. Check door is closed. No need to enter. Ward 8 was at the end of the east corridor, near the old archive room. I passed by there around 3 in the morning, with the hospital already deep in an almost supernatural silence. The corridor was narrower, poorly lit, with clear signs of disuse. The paint on the walls was peeling, and one of the lights flickered intermittently. When I got to the door of Ward 8, I noticed it was slightly ajar, as if someone had forgotten to shut it all the way. I hesitated, glanced inside just enough to see part of the room. It didn't look abandoned. Chairs were aligned, beds were made, curtains carefully drawn. The light was on, and it wasn't supposed to be. I gently closed the door and moved on. Tried to ignore the feeling that someone inside that room had just noticed me and was waiting for me to come back. The next night, I walked down the same hallway, taking my time. I tried to act like I wasn't thinking about it, but that didn't work. Ward 8 was there, just like before, and again, the door was left ajar. I didn't know if someone on staff passed by and opened it by accident, or if it was just one of those things no one wanted to admit they'd noticed. This time, I got a little closer. I pushed the door just enough to create a narrow opening, enough to peek inside without crossing the threshold. The fluorescent light was on, too white, too cold. The beds were there, 6 in total, all made with tightly stretched sheets and neatly stacked pillows. Each bed had its curtain drawn, as if waiting for patients. What truly unsettled me was the heart monitor. One of the machines near bed 3 was lit up and blinking with the familiar rhythm of a heartbeat. But the cables were coiled up on the side table, disconnected from anything living. I felt a strange weight in my stomach, a pressure that seemed to pull the air from the room into me. It was like the atmosphere in there had a different density, heavier, charged. The kind of feeling you get when you walk into a house where something terrible happened, even if you don't know what. I stepped back, gently closed the door, and continued with my shift. I tried not to think about it anymore, but that was impossible. The hospital seemed normal everywhere else, even welcoming in some places. But the east hallway had a coldness all its own, like it was sealed off from the rest of the building. Later that same shift, I passed by there again, by accident, walking on autopilot, and through the small gap in the door, I saw something different. The curtains around bed 3 were slightly parted. I don't remember seeing them like that before. I don't remember hearing any sound, but I was sure there was a dark shape behind the curtain. Still, motionless, I didn't go in. Not this time. I kept walking, head down, my heartbeat matching the rhythm that monitor had simulated earlier. On my report sheet, Ward 8 was just a decommissioned unit, but what I saw in there felt like anything but empty. It was on the 3rd night that I decided to actually go in. I can't explain why. Maybe the repetition of it all had built up into a kind of quiet obsession. Like each strange detail pulled me in deeper, one step at a time, until ignoring it just didn't make sense anymore. I waited for the calmest moment of the shift, when the others were busy in distant wings. I grabbed one of the empty patient charts and walked to Ward 8 with steady steps, trying to look confident. But inside, I felt the exact opposite of safe. The door, as always, was slightly ajar. When I stepped inside, the harsh fluorescent light momentarily blinded me. Everything was clean, organized, but there was a feeling of recent use. The beds were still made, yes, but the sheets were subtly creased, like someone had just gotten up. The air was cold, but heavy with humidity. I went to the counter where doctors usually leave reports. To my surprise, there were old charts stacked there. Yellowed pages, some stained with what looked like rust or dried coffee. I started flipping through the names, and something made me stop. One of the files had my name, first name, last name, exactly right. It listed my birth date, medical details that matched my history perfectly, but that was impossible. I had never filled this out. No one should have access to that kind of personal detail. And even if they did, why would they put it there? Before I could dig deeper, the ward's lights shut off all at once. Not flickering like a power outage, just off. And the silence that followed was total. Not even the hum of electronics. Not the whisper of circulating air. In the dark, I heard dragging footsteps. Not from the hallway, but from inside the ward itself. Behind the curtains. It took me a few seconds to pinpoint where it was coming from, and that's when I realized it was from bed 3. The same one where the monitor had lit up before. I tried switching on the badge flashlight. Nothing. It failed. The sound continued. A heavy, labored breathing. And the scratch of fingernails against the metal railing of the bed. My muscles locked for a moment. I couldn't scream, couldn't run. But something in me kicked in. I bolted from the room, heart pounding so loud it felt like it shook the floor. When I came back with the security guard on duty, the lights were back on. The ward looked exactly as before. Clean, untouched. And the charts? Gone. I rushed to the record system and searched for the ward. No data, no entries. Ward 8 hadn't had any active patients in over 10 years. No admissions. No assigned staff. No visits, but I had seen it, had felt it, and I could still hear, in the back of my mind, that breathing behind the curtain. That room might not exist in the files, but it was far too alive to be forgotten. After that night, I realized there was no point in trying to forget. Ward 8 wasn't a system error or a poorly documented abandoned wing. It was a living space, and something in there wanted to be seen or heard. On my next shift, I brought a body camera. Nothing fancy, just one of those small ones that clips discreetly onto a lab coat pocket. I needed to capture anything strange that happened, even if just to prove to myself I wasn't imagining it all. I waited until the hospital quieted down. Then I went straight there. No detours, no hesitation in the east corridor. I just went. The ward door was once again slightly ajar. As if it had been waiting for me, I stepped in. This time, something was different. The lights were on as usual, but the air smelled off, not just like ether or mildew. It was something sweeter, slightly metallic, like flowers left in a sealed room for too long. And the beds, one of them, was no longer empty. On bed 4, a woman was sitting. It was hard to guess her age. Her skin was pale, almost gray, but her body looked young. She wore an old hospital gown, one that hadn't been used in years. Her hands rested neatly on her thighs, head tilted slightly to the side. Long hair fell over her face, but I could see enough. She didn't move, she didn't speak, she didn't breathe. But she was looking at me. It felt like she knew exactly who I was. Like she'd been waiting for me, night after night. The light above her didn't flicker. The room was dead silent. Even with everything I'd seen before, this moment felt wrong on another level. This wasn't just a haunting. It was like she was part of the very structure of the room. My feet were rooted to the floor, not by physical paralysis, but by a force that seemed to hold me there. Like that woman was studying me, measuring me, deciding if I deserved to leave. I don't know how long I stood frozen. But eventually, I managed to step back. I walked away slowly, never turning my back on her. And with every step, the feeling grew stronger that if I turned away, she would move. Follow. I stepped through the ward door and shut it, pressing my body against it from the outside, hands shaking. My breath came in short, ragged bursts. It was like my body hadn't yet processed that I was free. I returned to the station. Tried to speak to my coworkers, but nothing coherent came out. I just sat there and waited for the shift to end. When I got home, I plugged the camera into my computer. The footage started out normal. A shaky image as I walked down the corridor, entering the ward. The camera panning over the beds. But the moment the woman appeared in frame, the footage glitched. The screen flickered, went grainy, and for a few seconds, everything went black. Then an image flashed. It was the hospital hallway. But the camera wasn't pointed forward. It was facing me, and over my left shoulder. She was there, standing still, eyes open, face inches from mine. The recording ended there. I know what I saw. I know where I was. But every time I tell the story, fewer people believe me. They say it was exhaustion, stress from the new job. But with every passing shift, a part of me feels like I'm being pulled back to bed 4, where she's still sitting, waiting. In the days that followed, I tried to stick to my routine. I did everything I could to seem normal, functional, the kind of nurse you'd expect on a night shift. But everything felt fake. The sound of the machines, the footsteps in the halls, even the quick conversations with coworkers. It all felt like it was happening behind thick glass, like I was slowly drifting away from the rest of the hospital. I started searching for answers outside the system, not in the hospital's internal records. They'd already proven useless, but in old archives, local news, forums for former employees. I spent countless nights poring over digitized files, forgotten reports, obscure internet posts and dead forums and threads buried years ago. That's how I found the truth. Ward 8 had once been part of a psychiatric wing that operated decades ago, before the hospital's restructuring. It was an isolated section, used for cases deemed too problematic for the other floors. Patients without family, without clear medical history, without any defined civil record. People who had been, quite literally, forgotten inside the institution. Many died there. Some disappeared from the records before that even happened. Later renovations never demolished the ward, they simply sealed it off. Officially, no one goes in. But for some reason, the power remains connected. It still gets cleaned from time to time. And the system, while no longer recognizing active patients, still lists the room as active. As if the hospital itself didn't have the nerve to erase that place completely. What became clear to me is this: everything ignored, everything forgotten, stays there. The woman sitting on bed 4, the monitors that blink on their own, the charts that appear and vanish, my name on a file. None of it was accidental. It's as if the space has turned into a kind of storage for presences. A place where what was never given an ending finds a way to keep existing. Ward 8 isn't cursed. It's a graveyard of unfinished things. And now it knows that I know, that last night, something in me already knew. It was no longer about investigating, understanding, or proving anything. It felt like a cycle was closing in. Something I had unknowingly triggered the first time I stepped into that hallway. I slid my badge into my pocket, tied my sneakers tighter, and went straight there. No camera, no distractions. The hospital felt emptier than ever. Even the usual ambient sounds, beeping monitors, sliding doors, the occasional whisper had vanished. When I reached Ward 8, the door was already wide open. I didn't think. I just walked in. The lighting was dimmer now, with a faint yellow hue, as if the bulbs had aged with time. The beds were all occupied. 6 beds, 6 bodies under taut sheets. No one moved. No sound of breathing, but they were there. Human silhouettes, still, each with its curtain slightly parted. I tried to leave. The door slammed shut behind me with a sharp click, like it had been locked from the outside. I twisted the handle, pushed with my shoulder, nothing. The lights began to flicker. The monitors, previously off, began blinking again, one by one. The sounds returned, but not from outside. They came from in there. Heavy breathing, metal being scratched, beds creaking. Then, the curtain around bed 3 began to slide open. By itself, the only thought I had was that maybe I had never really left since that first time. Maybe that place had been pulling me in from the beginning, and now it was my turn to stay. The next morning, the shift supervisor found my station empty. Papers were in order. My lab coat still hung on the back of the chair. My mug was warm, half full of coffee. Everything looked as if I had simply stepped out to the restroom and never returned. They tried reaching me by radio, then by phone. They searched the main wings, the bathrooms, even the parking lot. Nothing. It took hours before someone thought to check Ward 8. When they got there, they found the door closed and locked from the inside. Maintenance was called. The door was forced open. No one was inside. The room was clean, empty. The beds were made. The monitors turned off. No sign of recent activity. No camera had recorded any entry or exit during that shift. The hospital's internal system showed no anomalies. No new patients, no incidents. No admissions logged during the night, except for one thing. On the administrative office printer, a single sheet sat outside the tray. It was a fresh admission form with my name, my birth date, and the bed number, bed 4. No one could explain where the document had come from. There was no print command in the system, and officially, no one accessed the patient records that night. The investigation was quick, discreet, closed in a matter of days. My position was reopened, and now a new nurse covers my shift. She received the same instruction at the bottom of her orientation sheet. Ward 8, check that the door is closed. No need to enter, but the door will probably already be ajar, just like it always was. When you've been sick for too long, hope becomes currency. That's how I was. Years battling a degenerative disease that drained my energy, my autonomy, my life. I couldn't work anymore, could barely walk without help. The medications were expensive and the public healthcare lines endless. I was on the verge of collapse physically, mentally, financially. It was in the municipal hospital's bathroom that I saw the flyer taped to the door of a stall. International Clinical Trial. Free treatment for advanced chronic diseases. Promising results. Limited spots. At the bottom of the page, a phone number and an address. That same afternoon, I called. The voice on the other end was far too gentle, as if they already knew I'd be calling. You've been selected. Come early tomorrow morning, complete fasting. The interview was quick, almost rehearsed. They asked more about my availability than about my medical history. They handed me a stack of papers full of technical terms I could barely understand. When I hesitated, the receptionist smiled. Most people don't read it anyway, it's just protocol. The good news is the treatment is promising and free. Promising, free, miraculous. And I weak, broken, and tired of fighting with blunt weapons, signed. The hospital was known, but they took me to an annexed building away from the main center. At the entrance, only a simple sign, Unit 3B. Inside, no reception, no family members. Just silence, white hallways, and coded doors. I had no idea that would be the last place where my name was officially recorded. I was greeted by a woman in a white coat who didn't introduce herself. She handed me a gray uniform with no pockets and a wristband with a number, not my name, just a code, 743B. From now on, follow the schedule. Medication begins in 1 hour. My phone, wallet, and documents were collected and stored for safety and full focus on the clinical protocol. No explanations, just cold notes on a clipboard. The room was small with a narrow bed, a bluish ceiling lamp, and no windows. Everything seemed too clean, too sterile. There were no clocks, no sign of time passing. It felt like being outside the world. When the first dose arrived, a nurse with no badge gave me a small cup of thick orange liquid and a white capsule. He stared at me until I swallowed it. Minutes later, the dizziness came. My whole body trembled, my muscles contracted involuntarily. The floor spun, my vision blurred. I vomited on the floor and passed out shortly after. I woke up hours later, lying on the same bed, a cold cloth on my forehead, not knowing if it was day or night. My body ached inside, like it had been squeezed to fit into a different mold. I thought about leaving, about canceling everything, but when I opened the door, it was locked. Inside, I was just patient 743B, and no one seemed interested in letting me out. The following days blurred into a surreal, repetitive cycle. Lights turned on and off automatically, marking times no one explained. 3 daily meals identical. Doses of pills and colored liquids, handed out by people who said only what was necessary. Take this, then rest. I started noticing the cameras. In the corner of every room, every hallway, the dining area. Small, discreet, but always there. One was positioned directly above the toilet. I started to wonder, was this treatment? Or surveillance? There were others like me. I saw at least 7 patients in gray uniforms with lifeless expressions. One of them, an elderly man with a vacant stare, started seizing in the dining hall. He fell to the floor, foaming at the mouth. We screamed for help. 2 men appeared, carried him off on a stretcher, and disappeared through a door I had never seen open before. The next day, no one mentioned his name, as if he had never existed. I tried asking about the medications we were taking. The answer came with a sharp glare from a woman in the medication ward. You agreed to participate. The content is confidential. It was clear we weren't patients, we were variables. And the hospital wasn't treating diseases, it was testing limits. I started pretending to take the pills, hid the capsules under my tongue, and spat them down the bathroom drain. If I wanted to survive, I had to stay more alert than they thought. It was time to find out what was happening behind those locked doors. The idea of escaping seemed absurd at first. Every door was electronically locked. Every step was monitored. But after days of watching staff movements and the treatment routine, I noticed something important. A silent shift change during the night, a window of time when control seemed to loosen for a few minutes. That's when I met Malik, a young, strong patient with an alert look. He noticed I wasn't taking the medication, pulled me aside in the dining hall, and whispered, "You're faking it too? Good. I used to work in hospital security. I have a plan." Trust came immediately, not by choice, but by necessity. On the 3rd night, we put the plan into action. Malik managed to unlock our hallway door with a piece of improvised metal. We crossed a dark wing where we found the forbidden store, a steel entrance marked Level 4, Restricted Access. We broke into the records room. There, we found medical files, photos, notes, and something worse, a folder labeled Unviable in red. Names of patients who had died during the experiment. I read mine and the mortality projection. As we tried to leave, the alarm went off. Malik shoved me toward the emergency exit. "Go, I'll hold them off." He stayed behind. I ran, papers hidden in my clothes, not knowing if I was escaping or just delaying the end. I got out through the fire stairs and jumped the back fence, fell into the bushes, injured, but free. Or at least, that's what I thought. Escaping was just the beginning. I spent 2 days hiding in a cheap inn in the next town. Feverish, injured, and afraid, I barely slept. Every hallway noise made me jump, but I still had the documents, the proof. Files, reports, test results that had never been authorized. Names, dates, and the raw truth. We were being used. I sought out an NGO that supports victims of illegal clinical testing. A social worker listened attentively and looked over the documents. Her face turned pale. She made dozens of copies and advised me to disappear for a while. If this is real, you're in danger. Hours later, I saw it on TV. Private hospital shuts down experimental unit after anonymous report. Management claims the facility was under renovation and denies any wrongdoing. They lied. Again, no one was arrested. The building was emptied in record time. All remaining documents vanished. Names like Malik's erased. I got an unidentified call a few days later. Just one sentence: "You should have taken the meds." That's when I realized speaking out was the right thing. But surviving would be much harder. Epilogue. Invisible scars. Years have passed. I never heard from Malik again. There was no trial, no justice. The after effects of what they did to me are still with me: inexplicable pain, memory lapses, and anxiety that haunts even the silence. Doctors say it's psychological. But I know the truth. My body was manipulated by people who saw me as a number, not a life. Sometimes someone asks why I keep telling this story. The answer is simple: so no one else signs a paper thinking they're getting a chance, when they're actually selling their body. Today, I avoid hospitals. I avoid white coats. I avoid mirrors. But most of all, I avoid silence. Because what they tested on me may be getting tested right now. In the basement of some hospital near you,